For everyone joining us now and for anyone who's watching this later, thank you so much for joining us. So Josephine, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what we're going to be tackling in this webinar today.
Okay, so I'm Josephine. I'm the founder of Strive to Learn. We're a tutoring, test prep, and college counseling company. So our whole world deals with these tests and why should I take them, the struggle of taking them, the frustrations of taking them, everything that kind of comes with this whole college application standardized testing world. So basically, my history of dealing with these tests is that I have always really just try to figure out together with students how they can make the test their own. So I think that's really important. They're called standardized tests, but our students aren't standardized, your kids aren't standardized, you aren't standardized. So how can you make this test accessible to you, and how can you make it really showcase your strengths and not your weaknesses? And how can you also make it an experience studying for it that will help you once you go to college and that will help you in any other exams? So I truly believe that studying for these tests, it could be a really frustrating experience, or it could be a really rewarding learning opportunity where you can figure out study methods, exam preparation methods, ways to deal with anxiety, things like that. So it can be a great learning opportunity too. We're here today because a lot of students, are worried about which test they should take, when they should take it, if they're current juniors. A lot of tests have been canceled. A lot of the juniors have not yet taken a first test in a regular year. Maybe they would have by now. So we're here to talk about that, how COVID has affected the testing landscape. We're also here to talk about the recent changes that the College Board announced on January 19th. So just a week ago, they, really released some changes. So yeah, those are kind of the topics we're going to talk about. I really want to encourage everyone here to please write any comments you have in the chat box. We'll do Q&A kind of intermixed throughout. So as things come up, just feel free to write them in the chat box, and Lily, our moderator, will bring them up as we go along. Also, if I'm in the middle of answering a question of yours and you want to discuss it more, feel free to turn on your mic, turn on your video, and discuss. I know that a lot of you will have questions about your specific situation, so we want to make sure to address those too. And Lily, since a couple people came on after you introduced yourself, could you introduce yourself again too?
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Lily. I am the social media manager and an admin assistant at Strive to Learn. And part of my job is hosting these wonderful webinars where I get to ask Josephine all kinds of questions and just really get down into the nuts and bolts of what happens at Strive. Yeah. Awesome. So you kind of already touched on my first question right there at the end, because I think a lot of what parents and students are anxious about right now is that there's been a lot of changes that have happened in testing and with the SAT specifically in the past couple of weeks. So I want to know more about the essay, because what's going on with the essay? What happened there?
Okay, so let's talk specifically, this is specifically SAT. This does not affect the ACT in any way. So the test makers of the SAT are the College Board. This is the same company that makes the AP tests, the subject tests, the SAT test, and a host of other tests. So what they did was they just discontinued the last section on the SAT test. The SAT test has a reading section, a writing and language section, and then 2 math sections. And the 5th section is optional. It has been until now an optional essay. So why did the College Board decide to discontinue that 5th section, that optional essay? There are a couple different reasons behind that rationale. What the College Board really wanted to do is adapt to the new realities and changes of the college admission process. Not just because of COVID recently, but that did accelerate this decision, but very much because of the just changing admissions landscape over the last few years. The idea is that they wanted to reduce the demand on students, and they wanted to simplify the process for students. So one of their first steps to do that was to cut the essay. So that will be no longer available after the June 2021 test. So the students who are currently signed up for an SAT any time between now and including the June 2021 test, if they sign up for it with the optional essay, they will still be taking it. However, if they'd like to cancel, they can just go online and cancel it, no problem, just the optional essay portion. So why did they cut the essay, right? In college, if you want to go to college, you need to have great writing skills, right? So you'd think that the essay is really important. Well, the essay became optional in the March, when they made the change to the new SAT in March 2016. On the ACT, the essay became optional soon after that as well. And one of the reasons why nowadays, now they've made this decision is the same reason why it became optional in the first place, even though it used to be mandatory. It's because there are other more predictive ways of showing college level writing abilities, is what the College Board found. They found that the essay actually isn't as predictive as they thought when it comes to predicting the college level writing ability of the student. I mean, the colleges, when you apply, they're getting your transcript, right? They can see 4 years of your English grades. Well, not 4, because you're applying your senior year. So say they can see 3 years of your English grades. That should tell them a lot about your college level writing abilities. There's also the writing and language section on the SAT, which is the second section. And that section is found to be most predictive of all of the sections on the SAT of college writing ability level. And you also have your entrance essays, right? You're writing a personal statement. You're probably writing some supplemental statements. You might be writing the UC personal insight questions. So there's a third way right there to show your college level writing abilities. The Ivy Leagues even dropped the essay requirement back in 2018, right? There were very few schools who even still required the essay. And then there were a bunch of schools who, or universities who said it's optional but recommended. So what does that mean, right? That makes it confusing. Okay, so some of my universities require it. Some of them don't say anything about the essay, and then some recommend it. So what does this actually mean? So the College Board just found that this is all very confusing for students. And I mean, Lily, I think you have a personal example of how the essay being optional kind of messed with your college applications. Do you want to tell us about that real quick?
Sure. So there's a whole interesting concept that we could talk about, which is called super scoring, which is essentially taking the highest scores from individual sections of different times taking a test and adding them together to get the highest possible composite score to then send to a school. When I was applying to college, didn't understand that you cannot super score an essay score. Like, you can't take a really good essay score and attach it onto the test score from a different time taking the test. And so although I had a high test score that I wanted to send to a school, it was not that instance that I had taken the essay at the same time. And so I had wound up having to send a lower test score because I had taken the essay at that time. Yeah. It all sounds very complex, and we can break that down as we go along. But
well, the good thing is we don't need to as far as the SAT goes, because that whole dilemma has basically been nipped in the bud because the optional essay will no longer exist. Everything else is staying the same right now. There is another change, but it's not the SAT that's affected. It's the SAT subject test. I know it still has the word SAT in front, but it's very different. So let's just call them subject tests. The subject tests were cut as well. There will be no more subject tests starting now, effective immediately. So students who were signed up for the May or the June subject tests, their registrations will be canceled and they'll receive a full refund. And the idea of the subject test is it's very specialized subject matter. You would take a subject test in Spanish, in physics, in math. So it's very specialized material. And what they found is that actually the subject test had so much overlap with the AP tests. And the College Board administers the AP tests. They make the AP tests. So they just found, why should we have two different sets of tests covering pretty much the same subject matter and make this even more complicated and have students who are already taking the AP test then feel like, oh man, I need to like really put pressure on myself and also take the subject test. So they decided and realized that the AP tests were already much more readily available, more widely adopted, and more effective. You have students of many more socioeconomic income statuses able to take these tests since they are administered at schools. So all in all, they just provide more equity, and they're covering pretty much the same subject matter in slightly different ways. So the SAT again decided to make this college application process easier for students, less decisions to make. You can take an AP test if you don't feel like it, you don't have to, but there's no need to stress yourself out about yet another standardized test like the subject test. And the cool thing is actually, since the test registrations were so impacted, especially in 2020, right? So not very many juniors have taken their first SAT yet. Some have, but definitely way less than in previous years. And that was because the seniors were clamoring to get their spot, and they were even taking their first test, in the second half, in the first semester of senior year. So overall, not ideal, right? So the College Board, this is the third part of their announcement from January 19th, is that they really want to work on making testing even more simplified and a more unified experience. So within that, they're really trying to make registrations more readily available if COVID continues to impact the availability of test centers in the way that it has the last 10 months. Then they really want to look into to potentially expand capacity for existing administrations. And one of the ways that they can do that is that because the subject test registrations are canceled, they have additional seats because it happens at the same test center location on the same day at the same time as the actual SAT test. So they'll allocate those seats to more students who need to take the SAT itself. So that's kind of cool too. Another thing that they're working on is developing a digital SAT. They haven't spoken about a specific release date yet, but that is in the making.
Wow, that's really exciting. I didn't know a good portion of that. I'm interested in, you mentioned this briefly, but since there are no subject tests now, is it important that students take the AP tests, or would you recommend that for any student who was expecting to take the subject test? Should they transfer over and take the AP tests?
That's a really great question. So real quick, I know some of our viewers came on a little bit after our intro. So anyone who has any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat at any time. We're kind of doing we'll factor in the questions as we go along. Lily will post the questions when they fit the subject matter. And then, if you have a really specific question, when we bring it up at that time, you're also free to turn on your audio or to discuss it more in depth. So we want this to be as interactive and want to make sure you all get your questions answered as possible. Okay. So that's a really good question. So let's talk about why did students even take SAT subject tests in the first place? It was usually to get into highly selective programs that were very specialized. So engineering students often had a required or recommended 2 or 3 subject tests, usually in a science, in math, and then in a third one. So hardly any students, really a small percentage of students even took the subject test. I think last year only 1 million students took it, or this was 2019, versus 4 million students took the AP test. So, right, that's also why they shifted it to AP only. So, it's kind of the same question of why or when should I take an AP class? It's really about how much you want to challenge yourself. Do you have a passion for a certain subject and really want to deepen your interest in that? Go for it. Do you really dislike history, but everyone's telling you to take APUSH because you're a junior? You may not want to, because it's a really, really high, heavy workload class. You may want to take a different AP class if that's what you want to do. But challenging yourself academically through the rigor of your coursework isn't the only way to show your passions and stand out. If you're more of a hands-on learner, you might instead use that extra time that you get by taking the regular level class, which is not lower level, it is regular level. You're taking a high school level class. AP is a college level class, right? So let's not forget that. AP is advanced placement. It should not be considered the norm. is advanced. And so you may, if you're more of a hands-on learner, want to really put effort into finding an internship, a shadowing opportunity, right? That is within your area of passion and curiosity. Because I think what's so important that what we need to not lose is trying to fulfill so many things because you think it'll look good on your application, but then forgetting to actually take the time to engage in activities that will help you reflect on your true passions. Because this is the time where you're figuring that out. You don't need to have your life figured out at 16, 17, even 18, right? You get to go to college. You are allowed to change your major. Most times it is usually possible, okay? But you want to really start that path of reflection. That's really important. You want to challenge yourself, but you also want to focus on balance in your life. You don't want to get to college, and that's the first time ever you've had a little breathing room in your schedule. That isn't healthy. It's not healthy for your development. And a lot of students crash and burn if they've lived their high school life like that. So I say challenge yourself, go for it, take those AP classes, but don't burn yourself out, and take the ones that really interest you. And if you don't take any, no problem. The biggest thing when you're thinking about AP classes, which, we're kind of going off on a tangent here, so I'm going to wrap this up. I'm just realizing this is a bit of a tangent, is don't sacrifice your unweighted GPA, okay? If you think that you can pull off a B or an A in an AP class, go for it. But don't get a C just because you're like, oh, it's weighted, it'll turn into a B. Because you are very severely slashing your unweighted GPA, and colleges usually start by looking at your unweighted GPA. Then, because that's what they can compare across states, right? Because not all states weigh. Washington State, for example, does not weigh, even though they have AP classes. And when they weigh, they might weigh differently, right? So if a college receives all these applications from all these different states, how do they compare students across the board? They start with your unweighted, then they factor in the rigor. And then, so for example, how many APs did you take? When did you take them? And then they layer on like that. So never sacrifice your unweighted GPA just to, get 5 APs in 1 year. It's not going to help you in the long run.
That's great. I appreciate the life advice added in there. So the change from the subject test change, the essay change, those aren't the only changes that are going on. I mean, there's things that are happening outside of College Board, outside of ACT. So something that's happening this year is an astounding number of colleges, in my opinion, I say astounding as an outsider, just like, wow, this is a lot of colleges, are going test optional. So for instance, I read today, like Cornell is extending their test optional policy through 2022. Can you tell us a little bit about what test optional means and what that means for students who are applying to college?
Yeah, absolutely. This is really important. We actually have a blog post up about this, so we should link that once this video goes up. Actually, Lily, could you please make a note of it? That will send a follow-up email with the blog post to test optional. Okay, so test optional, I think it's a really, really great invention. It's been around for a long time, since the 80s, I believe. So it's not something new that was, created or invented to take us through COVID times. It's something that over 50% of universities already were doing before COVID ever started. So test optional means that you can apply in one of 2 ways. Either you send in your application without test scores, so no SAT, no ACT score, or you send in your application with test scores. It is your option. Yeah? So the test scores are optional. How do you decide which way to apply, right? A test optional school, it'll ask you on the application, will you be submitting your SAT or ACT scores? And would you like us to factor them into your admission decision? They ask you that on the application. You have to check the box and then you send your score. So what they usually do, and this I would say pretty much applies across the board to all schools who do test optional, is that they divide the applicants into 2 pools. One pool is all the students who applied without the test, without the SAT, without the SAT, and the other applicant pool is all the students who applied with it. The ones without it, they look at all the stuff, they look at the ones with it. Your GPA, your rigor of coursework, your letters of recommendation, your college entrance essays, your extracurricular record, right? All of these things coming together. You can Google the UC 13 factor review process that has 13 factors that they take into account. So why 13? Because the SAT, ACT have been nixed off of the UC system. So they went test blind, not just test optional, as of now, basically, which is a very recent decision. Well, it's been since December, but and so it used to be 14 factors and now it's 13. So with a test optional school, basically it is not ever to the student's detriment to apply without a score. So then the question is, well, why should I even bother, right? Why should I take this score? Well, there's a lot of kind of fluctuation between GPAs, right? I'm sure that you have a friend who goes to a different school whose GPA is like way higher, but you feel like they don't have as hard of a workload or something like that, right? And you're like, man, why is my school so demanding? but this other person has straight A's and I have some B's in there, and I'm working hard, but sometimes I struggle a little bit. I feel like I should get rewarded more. Well, GPAs differ. Grade inflation is a problem, and it differs from school to school. So because of all those variations and fluctuations, when you apply to college, your counselor also sends a school profile to help the university assess, how should they really interpret your GPA and your course load compared to the other students at your school, because it's hard to sometimes compare you to students of a different school because their system may be somewhat different. So although everything is numbers, right, out of your GPA, it's still really hard to compare across the board. The SAT and the ACT are ways to show what you can do when you're taking the exact same measure of assessment as everyone else. So it's a way that you can really shine and stand out. It's a way that you could show a strength that you feel like your GPA isn't showing. If you've struggled with math in school, but then you studied a lot for this test and managed to get a pretty high math score, you can show, hey, I have challenges in this area, but I am ready to work hard and to really study and prepare to make it happen. And that is the mindset I'm going to bring to your college. So in those ways, it can really be a way to kind of put your GPA into perspective, to boost your GPA, and to make up for some areas that may look like red flags on your application. Also, scholarship consideration at many schools does like to factor in your SAT, ACT scores. And if you do have a low GPA, I highly recommend taking the tests. Also, you can choose to apply without the test at a test optional school, even if you've taken the test. So there is no harm in taking the test, then deciding, you know what, I'm not that happy with my score. This is a bigger struggle than I thought it would be. So I'm going to let go of that, and I'm just going to focus on my GPA. I'm going to focus on my extracurriculars. I'm going to focus on crafting a really strong college application, and I'm going to apply without the test. That is a great, perfectly valid choice and a healthy one. On the other hand, you might prepare for the test, you might take it, you might score higher than you thought you would, and it can be really motivating. So I just think, like, for me, I've always really, really appreciated test optional schools. I mean, it's never been a level kind of a reflection of selectivity. I mean, the University of Chicago, highly, highly, highly selective university, has been test optional for a long time. So definitely, don't think about it as, oh, now it's less competitive or less selective. There are other reasons why it's very good for a university to be test optional. So obviously it has a lot of pros for the students that I just pointed out, right? It's kind of a win-win. If you don't have the score you want, you apply without it, make sure everything else looks really strong. If you do have a high score, great, it's just going to help you, right? And so if you apply to a school that is, sorry, the chat just popped up, so I totally I was looking at that. If you apply to a school that is test optional, I think I've lost my train of thought, but that's okay. I'm going to answer the chat question. I'm sure it'll come back. So Dee Dee's asking, are you saying that you can select the option to submit a test in your application and then decide not to submit the score without penalty? No. I am saying that you can, as a junior or senior, take the SAT or the ACT. And then when you are filling out your application, you tell them, yes, I will submit scores, or no, I will not. Once you've made that decision, you're usually locked in to that decision. Now, some colleges did make a difference, well, an exception for that this past year for the current seniors who have already sent in their applications. The UCs, for example, allowed you to go and change it until I believe it was January 1st. So they allowed you to go back in and change it from I will be submitting to I won't be submitting, because they knew that some students maybe thought they would be able to test in December, but then might have had a canceled test date. So to clarify, prepare to take the test so you have the option, then you can decide. That's exactly right, Dee. That's perfect. Yeah, so it's nice because it's a win-win in that sense. What I was going to say, now I remember my train of thought. So it's a win-win for the students. It's a really positive choice. But the universities also get something out of it. Think of it this way. If you apply with a test score, I'm assuming your test score is pretty good. Otherwise, you would probably choose to apply without a test score. Am I cutting out or am I still good, Lily?
Your visual is cutting out a little bit, but we can hear you just fine.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Let me know in the chat if I do cut out. Yeah. So everyone applying with a test score is submitting high test scores. So what happens is then in the school's admission statistics, it starts looking a little scarier. Your average test score of the admitted student pops up by, on the SAT, potentially by 50 or 100 points. On the ACT, 3 points, 5 points. So the school starts looking more selective. On one hand, because the statistics, the averages, etc., the mid 50% range of the incoming classes SAT, ACT scores is going to be higher, since only the scores are factored in of the students who submitted them, and those are the higher scoring students. Right? And then the other thing that happens is that they have more applicants, because once you take away a requirement, especially a requirement that costs money, necessitates travel, etc., you have more applicants because more students have access to actually submit everything that the application asks for. So higher number of applicants admitting the same number of students equals a lower acceptance rate, which makes the university look more selective again. So this could turn into making the admission statistics look a little scarier than they used to be, even though it's not actually necessarily harder to get into. Does that make sense? So all of this, why is this important for the university? Because that's what affects their rankings. And all universities are always trying to get to the top of those rankings. And there are sometimes, weird arbitrary things that allow them to rise. So that's kind of a win situation for the university from their perspective. So as of now, a lot of universities, almost all universities, went test optional. Some went test blind, which means you can't submit a test score no matter what. They will not look at it, but that's not as common as test optional. And a lot of them went test optional for the incoming class of 2021, fall 2021, so current seniors. Others went test optional for 2 years. They want to test it for 2 years, so including the class of 2022, like Cornell, which you just announced, Lily, and then they want to revisit. So a lot of schools are going to revisit whether they're going to be test optional another year or stay test optional indefinitely. So the current juniors, they won't know yet. Yeah, they don't know right now whether or not the university is going to be test optional, unless the university has already announced that they're going to be test optional for the incoming students for fall 2022. Mm-hmm. So that's the number you have to look out for current juniors.
Sure. That's so interesting. I have a question which I realize is probably going to be unfair to you. I understand you can't make wild predictions and guess at what's going to happen in the future, but in terms of kind of the precedent that this year sets, how do you feel colleges will move forward as life kind of returns to a non-COVID state? In continuing to require tests and continuing to have different standards for their applications? How do you think that will, like I said, set precedent?
So I don't have a crystal ball, as you pointed out, but here's what I hope, and I am very optimistic about this. I think, again, no crystal ball. This is not a fact. This is not a fact. This is a conjecture of what I think might happen, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen. I think that more universities will decide to stay test optional once they have sorted through the statistics of the most recently admitted class and compared them all around. Most universities that have already gone test optional pre-COVID and made that conscious choice did so because they realized they got a much more varied class with students of more backgrounds, of more socioeconomic statuses, and their college preparedness was not affected in any way by the test optional. They had really great students in their classes, and they had really great GPAs all around once they got to college. So none of that was negatively affected by switching to test optional. So I think more and more universities are going to realize that and hopefully stay test optional and make it more of a trend. I mean, like I said, already over 50% of universities had been test optional. So hopefully that continues. Also, fairtest.org. Here, fair. Are you writing it? Go ahead. Fairtest.org is a great website that gives you a lot of information about test optional practices, and it has a list. They update it every 2 to 3 days and talk about, which on this list are all the test optional schools, and it'll specify which universities test optional until when. So it'll say, class of 20, so incoming 2021 and 2022, or it'll say, oh no, only the 1 year. So I really highly recommend that website. And I think in our blog post about test optional, we also do have a link straight to that website. Perfect. Thank you, Lily, for posting that blog post in the chat. It'll have a link straight to the actual PDF that they consistently update with all of the test optional schools and test blind schools.
Great. So I'm interested, and this isn't strictly a question about the test. So for people who are applying without a test score, whether that's to a test optional school or a test blind school, what do you feel is the most important, or kind of your top priority for the rest of their application? What should be the strongest part of their application?
Right. Great question. This is something I hear admissions representatives talk about all the time whenever I visit a college. And, nowadays our visits are virtual. We have one coming up, actually, so that's pretty exciting. So let me tell you what I hear most often. What they want to see is that the student has some sort of curiosity or passion, something that, intrinsically motivates them to dig a little deeper. So then it's like, well, how do I show that on an application, right? So there are a couple different ways. And I think the most important part is that your application, it weaves together in a way that makes sense and isn't all over the place. So one way to do that is through your extracurriculars. One of the things that I recommend is, as a college counselor, is to don't try to do everything. Don't try to have 20 things on your resume. Instead, choose a handful of things that you're really passionate about and excited about doing, and that'll help you also figure out, is this something I really like? And that might lead me to a major of my choice, or is it something that's just fun for now, right? And go and do that. So longevity of involvement is important. So rather than doing something new, every semester, try to have at least 3 activities that you've done for at least 2 years. Depth of involvement is important. So seeing that your depth of involvement changes and deepens every year as you go through. And leadership opportunities are important too. If there's a club or something you really enjoy, maybe you want to become treasurer or something like that, right? So really seeing that evolution throughout your high school years is important. Another way that you can see that or add context to that is through your personal statement and through any supplemental essays. And then another way, of course, your academic record should be your best. It should be as strong as, for you individually, personally, it can be and make sense. Again, like I said, as you find balance in your life as well. So, challenging yourself. If you say that you're really, really into the STEM field and you really love anything STEM, but then, you know, you've only taken the minimum high school science requirement and no APs, then that's a little bit of a red flag. And that's why I mentioned cohesiveness is really important, because otherwise it's kind of like, well, then why didn't you take this opportunity? Or if you say, you know, I really want to do the pre-med track and maybe your school has an ROP program with an EMT class or something like that, then, and you didn't take it, you know, you would want to address why you didn't do that, because they will know that your school offers that in the school report. You know, so focusing on grades and academics, rigor of coursework, focusing on your extracurriculars, and then also your college essays. Those are 3 really great ways to show your passions, to show your strengths, show your curiosity, and really stand out as, you know, who you are and what you value and what's important.
I'm also linking a blog post that was written by one of our college counselors about activities on the Common Application and on the UC application, as well as another webinar that we did that dives into that topic in more depth. So I know that another thing that is really important for students and parents is kind of strategies and kind of the implementation of the kind of tips and tricks that you learn for actually taking the test, whether that's the SAT or the ACT. So I have a couple of questions about that. The first one is, we're here to talk about 2 different tests. Which one should I take? How do I know which one is the one for me?
That's a great question. Don't take both. It's a little stressful to take both. Not that you can't, but it's just, I don't advise it. I think it adds a little more stress than you need. Instead, figure out which test you're better at. Which test do you hate less? Which test are you more down for studying for, right? Because this is work you're doing outside of all your schoolwork. You're probably really busy. So what we do, and I really, really stand behind this method, is take a diagnostic test of the SAT full length and take a diagnostic test of the ACT full length, and then compare your results. There are a lot of little quizzes out there. If you Google it, you can find a bunch of them that are like, take this 10-minute quiz and find out whether you should take the SAT or the ACT. They are not very efficacious. They do not predict how you will do on the actual test. I've had a lot of students who did those and were like, no, I really want to take this test. Once I finally convinced them, please take a full-length diagnostic. I'm like, I promise I will never make you do this again, taking 2 full-length tests, but please just, you know, make those 3 hours of time one weekend and then maybe the other weekend, and then we can compare them. And oftentimes they were really surprised. They were like, wow, like the last 2 years, I've really thought I should take the ACT because I'm strong in math and science. And everyone always told me that means I should take the ACT. And then they took it and they realized that they had a lot of timing issues on the ACT. They didn't finish their sections. And they also realized that their score ended up being lower because the science section was really different from what they expected. And, you know, I'm not saying that every student would have that experience. This is like a little case study, but this is something that happened to one of my students. And then she said, like, oh, thank God I took both, because now I actually understand the difference between the tests and I can see I'm doing better, and it felt better on the SAT. So now I'm a lot more motivated to study for this test because I can already see my areas of improvement, while the other test was like, kind of brought me down a little bit because I was bummed that I couldn't finish the sections in time, right? So that's our method, and it's been, you know, really, really working for all of our students over, you know, the past 7 years. And so we offer actually free diagnostic tests, and we proctor them online now. Or we send you the PDF and the student can take it on their own time if they're really busy and don't want to be, you know, locked into a certain time. And that's something you can sign up for free on our website. And then what we do is we do a complimentary evaluation. So instead of just throwing your score reports at you and then you're like, okay, this is out of 36, this is out of 1600. How do I compare these? The sections have different names, right? It gets really confusing. It's like they just were like, let's make it really hard to know which test you're better at by, you know, having completely different scoring systems. So what we do is we really go over that with you and help you understand how they compare. You can also look up a chart both on the College Board website and on the ACT.org website that will compare the scores. But I think it's still kind of difficult to look beyond just the number comparison if you don't have all the other information. So let me tell you a few key differences on who should take which test. If you are someone who likes to have a little more time on tests, who struggles, under time pressure, the SAT might be better because it has across the board on all sections more time per question. If you are a student who really loves math and you're creative with math, it's something that's come easy to you, you love logical thinking and reasoning, the SAT might be your test. Half of your score on the SAT comes from the math sections. You have a no calculator section and you have a calculator section, and they get put together for one math score. That's 50% of your score. On the ACT, on the other hand, and you know what, let's email out an overview of this, okay, to everyone who attended. On the ACT, you have, yes, Dee Dee, there is a link on our website for the Proctor Diagnostic test. Maybe Lily, while I explain this, you can find it and pop it in there. Okay, thanks. You can sign up for it on the website. Okay, on the ACT, you have a math section. It's one of 4 sections, so it's 25% of your score, right? So if you're weaker in math and you do pretty well with the school math, as long as you can prepare, but the logical thinking and getting really creative with math in ways that you haven't seen before isn't quite your thing, then the ACT might be better. If you are a slower reader, then the SAT might be better because you do have more time, especially on that reading section. So there are a couple different things, right, that really affect it. So timing is one. If you really hate geometry, maybe the ACT isn't the right thing because the ACT has more geometry. So the content of the sections themselves, even though the sections have similar names, the content is a bit different too. So these are the things that we really go in depth on. Actually, our academic coordinator, William, he's the one who does all the evaluations and really helps the students figure out, how did I do on this test? What does this even mean? How would I, even go about studying? And the reason why we, want to make sure we're offering both diagnostic tests and the evaluation as a complimentary service is because we understand that not everyone can afford to do massive amounts of test prep, nor should they. So in this way, at least we're providing a service that would allow the student to then start self-studying, even if they decide not to do test prep, right? And that's just a way that we really want to add value to our community and help students, gain that confidence and agency to be able to help themselves as well. So we have, a gamut of students. Some students, are like, okay, I just want help with all of it. Sign me up for test prep. Awesome. Other students say, okay, I'm going to start studying on my own, and then I'm going to bring to you and schedule sessions for the things that are really confusing to me to deepen that. And other students might want to start with a foundation and then continue self-study afterwards. So it's, everyone is different, and that's really, really important. And that's really what we cater to, is making sure, like I said in the beginning, that we're not trying to squeeze our students into the box of the test. We're really trying to make the test accessible in a way that meets each student's needs.
Yes, absolutely. And I can testify to that.
Right. You were our ACT student.
Yes. I was for a long time.
May I give a shout out to your score?
Oh, yes, please do. Please do.
You want to tell us what your score was in the end?
Sure. My score was a 32 composite on the ACT, and it started at a 26, 25, something like that. So considerable jump thanks to all of the gold nuggets of information that Josefine is telling you right now. I
also thanks to the hard work you put in.
Thank you. I appreciate
yourself short there.
True. I did take the test in the end, so I appreciate that. That actually leads into something that I hear students talking about all the time. My sister actually just took the PSAT this morning, and all of her friends are having this discussion right now. What would you call a good score on either of the tests? What is a good score?
So there is no good score.
Well,
let's say in the area that we are located in Orange County in Southern California, where most of our students are. We have some students from farther away, but most students are here. Just like grades have been heavily inflated, so has the idea around what a good test score is. I have a lot of students who walk in and I ask them, what's your goal score? And they're like, I want a 30 on the ACT, or I want a 1400 on the SAT. That's, you know, above the 95th percentile in the nation. You want to score in the top 5% of the nation? Of course, I would call that a good score. That's an excellent score, right? So you really can't put a label on it, a good score, a bad score. I think even you, Lily, you were like, man, I have a 25. Like, this is not a good score. A 25 is way above average, right? A 21, I believe, is average. So what's important is that you don't compare yourself to others. You compare yourself to you. And you start thinking about, why in the world am I taking this test? I am taking it because I want it to help my college applications. Well, then ask yourself, which colleges are you kind of interested in applying to? I know it's still, you know, a little while out before you're sending in the actual application, but junior year is the year where you should really be looking into some stuff, researching, attending some free virtual information sessions, since right now you may not be able to go and actually visit the colleges, you know, but really starting to expose yourself to that. So start looking at those admission stats and start getting a feel for what they are. And then what I recommend looking at is the middle 50%. If you can score somewhere in the middle 50% of the university you're excited about, that means you have a really good shot. Now, your SAT score or your ACT score will not make it or break it. It will not get you in and not make you not get in. Okay. Your GPA is very important. Your extracurriculars are very important. Your essays, your letters of rec. There are a lot of aspects here. So don't just look at that one thing, right? For example, if you fall below the 25th percentile in your test score from, let's say, your diagnostic test, but your GPA is above the 75th, keep in mind that will balance out. And if your school is test optional for the year 2022, then that, if you can't raise your test score, might be one of the universities that you decide not to send your test score to, right? So a good score, it really depends on your GPA. It depends on the universities that you're intending to apply to. And I would say, you know, look at that national percentage. If you're in the 95th percentile, focus on that. Focus on, wow, I did better on this test than 95% of all the students who took it. You know, so I am all about setting high goals, but I'm also about celebrating your wins. So I see students so many times put themselves down because they didn't get the same score as their friend, and therefore they feel like they're less than. And I really think that, you know, we really need to work on students seeing how awesome they are and celebrating their hard work. And then, of course, setting a new goal and striving for that. Wonderful. I am all for it. But a good score basically doesn't exist. Compare it to the university's entrance, not requirements, but entrance statistics. That should all be released now for the incoming class. So.
Awesome. So for a student who's looking at, say they want to go to UCLA and they see that the middle 50% of students are scoring whatever, a number, and they're comparing their own test score to that middle 50%, how often should they retest? Because the goal, I'm assuming, is to then improve your score. So when should they next take the test?
Right. So don't test a month after you got your first test, because it'll take you at least 2 weeks to get your score, and then and then you're freaked out, and then you not a good idea. So give yourself enough time between your first and your second test to receive your results, digest them and process them, and come up with a plan on what you're going to do to increase them from there. And so I usually recommend having 2 months between tests. So if you took it in March, maybe you want to take it again in June or May. If you're taking AP classes, don't take it in May, take it in June. But if you're not enrolled in any AP classes, May might be a good time for you. So don't take like the October test and then the November test, unless you really want to take it again and you are just practicing seamlessly between taking your test in October and taking it in November, regardless of when your scores come in. That's an option. I've had some students do that if they're like really, really on it. But honestly, start early, start in junior year, take your first test, hopefully, February, March, then get your test results back, decide, do you want to take it a second time, then book it for May or June. then decide you want to take it a third time. That's usually it. Most of our students take it 2 or 3 times. I do recommend definitely taking it twice, just because you're in the test setting the second time. You're a little more comfortable. You know what to expect a little bit more. So oftentimes we see a score increase, jump up on the SAT of 50 points or jump up on the ACT of 1 or 2 points, just because the situation is no longer brand new, right? And that can be really helpful. Another thing that can affect your test score from day to day is how much did you connect with the specific reading passages that were on your test, right? Maybe it was about a topic that really speaks to you, that you have a passion for, and that's why you were able to suddenly have your reading score jump up, because you were really connecting to the subject matter, right? That's kind of an unpredictable part there. So definitely take it twice if you can afford it and have access. If you have issues with access for financial reasons, you can apply for a fee waiver. So just know that that is an option. Talk to your school counselor or contact the College Board directly. I believe it's in their FAQ section, or the ACT as well. You should be able to get a fee waiver. And once you've gotten a fee waiver for one of these standardized tests, it's a lot easier to get fee waivers for when you are applying to college, to actually waive the application fees, because they say, if you've already been granted one for the standardized test, then we'll grant you one as well. So it makes it a little bit easier. Just putting that out there.
Speaking of taking the test multiple times, I mentioned this earlier, kind of in the layman's kind of terms with my essay issue. But can you tell me a little bit more about super scoring and what that is, and what are some of the benefits of that?
Yeah, super scoring is great. So, like I just said, sometimes you get that reading section where you just clicked with like 2 of the passages, and you're like, for me, it's the science section. If there's a little more biology than like physics, I'm like, yes, I love this section. So personal preference. And so, maybe you got the same score. Let's say you took the ACT the first time, you got a 26. You took it the second time, you also got a 26. But your scores across sections were differently distributed. Maybe on the first one, you scored high on the reading and the math, and on the second one, you scored high on the writing and the science. And when you put them together, you would have gotten a 28 if only you had done it on the same test, right? So the schools, the universities that have a super scoring approach, they will actually do that. You'll submit both tests, and they'll calculate your super score by adding the highest sections from both test dates together to create that overarching score of a 28. Even though you never achieved a 28 in one sitting, you have achieved it basically across 2 sittings, so they would honor that. You have to be really, you really have to look into whether or not the universities you're applying to allow that. It's a lot more common that they do that for the SAT. It's less common that they do it for the ACT. So this is something that if you can't find it on their website and you don't have a college counselor you're working with, highly recommend giving their admissions office a call or shooting an email. It's stronger if this comes from the student, because then they're showing interest in the college. I highly recommend having the student reach out to the college and asking them if they have a super scoring policy or not.
So even if a school doesn't super score, should a student send all of their scores from every test that they take?
It depends on the policy that the university has. Most of the time, you can just send your highest score. Few universities say that we want to see all of them, but we'll consider your highest. So Georgetown is one of those, for example. So again, be on it, go on those admissions websites and see what their policy is. Will they want to see all of them? So, don't just sign up 5 times for the test if you're not going to study for 2 of those 5 times. Only sign up for the test when you can prepare and build on your score. Is it the end of the world if you scored lower on your second than your first? No, sometimes things happen, but you do want to try and have that upwards trend. So don't just take it to take it. Be prepared to take it, because some of your universities may want to see all of them. And that's called a score choice, is when you can only send one, which is most universities, but some of the very selective universities, Georgetown is among them, they will state on their website, we do not have the score choice policy. You will have to send all of your attempts at taking the test. But they'll still consider your highest.
Sure.
So it's kind of like, okay, great. So you'll see all of them, but you'll consider my highest. Can I trust that? But yeah, that's all you can do at that point, is trust that they will.
Sure. Dee Dee wants to know, have you seen an improvement in the availability of test spots and sites open to students?
I would say yes. Towards the end of 2020, I did see an improvement. We had several students who were finally able to take the test. One thing I can say is that the students who were able to take the test in California were registered at testing centers that were at hotels. The testing centers that were at schools were often closed because the school itself was closed. And that's what really negatively affected a lot of students, versus hotels didn't close, and therefore those tests were still administered. So we had a student, for example, finally be able to take a test in San Diego it was in November or December, and the student had been trying to take the test, and finally happened. I think that especially with these new College Board changes in between now and June, there should be more testing possible, because they are trying to create more seats, etc. For example, by having gotten rid of the SAT subject tests, and they are putting more active effort into that. So my hope is yes, and I do say I have seen an improvement. I mean, basically, the first few months of the pandemic, that's when there was nothing. So it did get better in the fall. Still wasn't great. Still, was not great, but I did see it get better. So now with this new spike and the numbers being so high, especially in our region, we'll have to see what happens to the first tests of the year. But I really do think that there is an improvement in the availability. We had some students opt to go out of state. Not everyone can do that, and it's a journey. So the students who did it usually had family in Arizona or Nevada or something and decided to take it there, but also combine it with a weekend with, family friends or their own family. So I don't recommend it, but if it's the only way you can, which was the case for our seniors, right? Last semester, it was the last chance they had, then why not? But being a junior, I think you'll be able to test here.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So for students who will continue to test regardless of where they are there techniques that you recommend for specific practices on the test, like timing or bubbling techniques that kind of maximize performance?
Yes, there are. Okay, so there are a lot of different strategies and techniques. I think timing is an important one, being aware of your time, understanding how much time do I have per section, being really prepared. And then I like to have the students write down the start time of that section, and then immediately under it, write down the end time that they're anticipating. Oh, I have 25 minutes for this section, so this is the time I'll end. I like them to be aware of when they're halfway through the section so that they understand their pacing. Am I doing well? At question 20 out of 40, I should be at halftime. Am I there? Or am I, did I get through 20 questions faster? Or did I take longer, right? So really talking about that. And for that, I mean, one of the big things is doing practice tests at home, do real tests, time yourself, do it at a desk, no interruptions, bright light, no music, okay? Because what you do it in the morning on a Saturday, you want to mimic the testing situation, timing, environment as best as you can when you are practicing, because you'll suddenly run into issues that were never a problem when you were just doing a section at a time at 8 p.m. after school, right? So of course that's good, do drills, practice your stuff, but to actually test yourself several times before you go to the real test. That's really important. That way you really get a sense for your timing. If you do have a timing problem that you're never ending on time, then start to slowly work up to getting to your goal, right? If you are only getting through 3 of the 4 reading passages on the ACT reading, don't beat yourself up about it and say, oh my God, next time I need to get 4. Instead, practice by doing a reading, not section, but a reading passage at a time. You, in the end, have 8.5 minutes per reading and 10 questions on the real test. But if you're only doing 3 right now, you're using about 12 minutes, maybe a little more. So instead of setting your goal to 8.5 minutes, set your goal from 12 to 11. See if you can do a few passages and 10 questions in 11 minutes. Once you have that under your belt, bring it down to 10.5. Then bring it down to 10, right? So it's like a sport. You have to train your brain. You need to get that practice. You need to build that muscle memory inside your thoughts, right? So, whittle away at it and set yourself smaller goals between your current and your end goal, right? So SMART goals, and then set yourself a time plan and just work consistently on it. So don't cram. It doesn't really work for these tests. I wish it would, but if it would, then everyone would have a high score. It's really about forming the right habits of really understanding these tests. We're at 6:31, so I could talk endlessly about strategies since that is what our tutoring entails, but I think those are some big ones that apply to both tests.
Awesome. At this point, I would usually ask you if you have any final advice. If you do, I'm happy to make that time. But I also recommend for anyone who's looking for some good advice on this to visit our blog. We have a wealth of blog posts written about all kinds of different testing, college apps, test prep, etc. things. And just a few final announcements. A lot of the things that you heard here today will continue to be echoed and expanded upon on our Instagram and Facebook profiles. We're always constantly writing and speaking and recording videos of ourselves and our experts talking about this stuff. So please go follow us on Instagram at Strive to Learn Tutoring. We have, as Josefine mentioned, an upcoming series of talks with college admissions reps where you can actually ask them questions and kind of mingle with representatives from potential schools that you'd like to go to. So I have linked that right now in the chat. And also we are constantly putting out newsletters. Our newsletters are full of all kinds of updates, blog posts, recorded webinars, and first opportunities for things like coupons, discounts, and all sorts of offers for anyone who is subscribed. So you can visit us www.strivetololearn.com and subscribe to our newsletter at the bottom of the homepage.
And we won't spam you. We send out twice per month. That's it. So you get 2 newsletters a month. Okay, you asked me for some end advice. My advice is take a diagnostic test of each, sign up for it on our website, do the free evaluation session, just because you'll get some very personal advice to your situation, to your test scores, to help you just be educated, so that you can then make your decision on, am I going to take the real one? How much time do I want to put into this? And you'll really understand what you're dealing with. So that's my recommendation is, getting educated about it. So using the free services that we provide. And just realizing it all seems like a lot and really stressful, but we are here to make it more manageable. The College Board is, with these changes, making it more manageable. So, people are on our students' sides, even when it sometimes doesn't seem like it and when it gets a little hard. So just talking to people who, know their stuff is really important. And like I mentioned before, even talking to admissions representatives at the colleges, having the student actually reach out and ask those questions, starting to connect, and just realizing we are all people and everyone is just working towards something, and facilitating that communication. So believe in your strengths and know that you are awesome. A lot of our students don't know that about themselves, and it breaks my heart. So, really focus on that and use that junior year as a time for reflection about what you're curious about, what brings you joy, and how you can create balance in your life while you're working towards your greater goals.
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. These conversations are always amazing. They benefit me as well. Thank you everyone for watching. We really appreciate you tuning in, and we will soon send you a follow-up email with all kinds of links and special things to read and investigate. So thank you all.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you so much.